All
Yes.
right. Matt, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on the podcast, guys.
Yeah, for sure. David, good to see you as always.
Stuart, always a pleasure to see you. My expectations of your face are always higher, but you continue to disappoint, which is something that I think is I love about our relationship. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm here for you. I'm here for you.
Hey man, I'm pumped about today's interview, by the way. Like I've
Yeah.
been excited all week about this. So
Me too,
super
man.
excited. Thank you, Matt, for taking the time. I know you're a busy man between saving lives and traveling the world to cut some time out for us knuckleheads. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So this is Filling Storehouse podcast, episode, I think it's 51 now.
51.
We got over the 50 mark, so we're pumped about that. And super excited to have Matt Parker on. Matt runs a pretty amazing company called Exodus Road. And this is the company that David and I have on our hearts to support this year, both, financially. We want to get the word out about Exodus Road, and hopefully we can kind of support in lots of other ways besides just providing some financial support. So Matt, welcome, man. It's good to see you. You're not too far away from me down in Colorado Springs. Is it snowing there today like it is here?
It is not too bad, but maybe 3 inches.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, man. Well, good. So if you don't mind, if you could kind of just start with just maybe from the beginning, like when I sat in your office a couple of weeks ago, you're kind of just telling me your story and kind of where it all got started. I say start there, man, because it's an amazing story.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm happy to do it. So, I'm currently running an organization that rescues victims of human trafficking, and we really specialize in finding people, specifically children that are being sold for sexual services, who've been trafficked into the sex trade. But we do labor trafficking as well. At times, some of our caseload is, uncles and aunts or moms and dads selling their kids, and other times it's pretty large transnational criminal syndication, moving large volumes of people in traffic scenarios. But so that's kind of where we are today. And it started around 2010, where my wife and I were living in Thailand. We were serving a children's home. We'd raised our support to go overseas, and we just had this deep heart for the global poor and had an opportunity to go love on and run this children's home of 48 girls from the hill tribe communities along the border of Thailand and Myanmar. And that was like perfect for us. We wanted to do that. So we packed up our 3 kids who were really young and moved overseas with them to a small town just north of Chiang Mai, Thailand. And through that process, discovered human trafficking. We didn't know anything about human trafficking. And back then, it was starting to kind of come on people's radar as a problem in the world, but it wasn't super big. And when we were living there, we started to interface with other missionaries and ministries that were fighting trafficking. So we started to learn, what was happening. And we started to kind of hear these rumors in the community that traffickers would go to impoverished areas and recruit young children to come take a job, basically, in a bigger city. So these families or communities were very isolated from society. They were in the middle of the jungle, a lot of these village communities. And so when a broker would come in his truck, 4 or 5 hours into the jungle and speak with these families felt like, this is a great opportunity for my child to go to a big city and have a real job, because a lot of these communities are, you know, they don't have citizenship. They're refugees, or they're agriculturally based, and education levels are really, really low. And so to have a broker come and offer employment to your child with promises of riches or a good job, that would be like really exciting for them as parents. And we do that too in the United States. We send our children off, you know, to a career, to a job with hope, you know, that this is going to be good for their future, good for the family. And so that was kind of the rumor. But then as the story went, these children would, you know, get into the truck and arrive into Bangkok or arrive into a larger city and then be told, hey, there's no job. In fact, you're going to be sold into prostitution. So that was kind of what we heard. And it was so disruptive, especially for me, because I was running and in charge of 48 girls coming from those impoverished communities. So I just decided to investigate that. And I drove up to the villages myself, and I interviewed these village pastors and leaders. And I just asked them if it was true. And spent about 3 days doing interviews in villages, and every single one of them told me that that was true, that it was common. And so that was, you know, a decade ago for me now. And it was the first time I really felt like, whoa, there is something systematic happening, that brokers or traffickers are exploiting the poor. They're lying to them, deceiving them, you know, basically taking the pretty girls out of the village or boys and then forcing them into prostitution. And then these parents wouldn't hear from their children again, or if they did, there was kind of this coercion and threat, duress placed on the children, so they wouldn't quite come out with it to their parents. And, you know, traffickers are very cunning and smart. And so they have been able to convince these kids that, you know, you're still going to make more money and send a little bit home. And that's good for your parents. And they would weave in religion and like Buddhism and supporting the family, and manipulate these kids to where they wouldn't run, or they would beat them and abuse them and threaten them so they wouldn't run. So all these things started to come on my radar, just running this children's home. And then some opportunity was presented to me to consult with Thai Royal Police on human trafficking and what I was learning from the village perspective. But I've been interviewing lots of nonprofit leaders in the community, just researching it. And law enforcement asked if I would help them really just conduct like a process evaluation, you know, what law enforcement was doing, what they weren't doing, what was working, why it was broken. And back then, the numbers that were floating around from the ILO, the International Labor Organization, you know, they were kind of saying, hey, there's 27 million modern day slaves. This is back in 2010 and 11. And now, of course, they're saying it's 40.8 million. Jeez. Which is just this overwhelming number. It's so many people, you would think you would trip over them walking down the street.
Yeah.
But as I started to consult with law enforcement, the thing that we started to learn was the majority of society trusts law enforcement to take care of this problem. And it is their job, right? Human trafficking is a crime, just like drug trafficking is a crime. And whose job is it to stop drug trafficking? Well, it's law enforcement's job. The problem, though, is human trafficking is very difficult to prove. Unlike drugs, if you catch somebody with cocaine on their person, they're going to jail. If you catch somebody with a young child with them, it's pretty easy to say, no, this child needed a ride. They were hitchhiking, or this is my sister's daughter, or I don't know this child at all. You know, you just deny it. And it's very hard to prove.
Right.
Especially if the child doesn't speak the local language. Law enforcement in most parts of the world, they're not thinking that anything nefarious is going on. They just think, hey, this child doesn't know this person or is lying. So it's just a harder thing to prove. And so when you start thinking about that, and you start thinking about law enforcement being largely underfunded and understaffed and undertrained and highly corrupt, it's just a perfect environment for bribes, for the systematic exploitation of children and people in general. So all of that just kind of hit me in the face all at once, and I was learning what was happening. I started to research border crossings, trafficking routes, how much children cost to buy them and sell them. And we started to do all this research, and I was on a sub working group committee with the Thai Royal Police with some other NGO leaders. And about a year into this process of just doing research, we all kind of looked up at the table from each other. And it was just this eureka moment that no one is actually looking for victims of human trafficking. We all had hoped that law enforcement were looking for them, but they're really not. And they're not for really legitimate reasons. Most law enforcement officers are understaffed and underpaid. They have 100 cases on their desk every month, and they're really only going to get to 5. And they're going to get to the 5 cases they can easily win because that's how they get promoted. Complex cases like human trafficking or capital crimes, the average law enforcement officer doesn't have the training or skills to do those cases, and it's not how they're going to get promoted. They're too difficult for them. And so it just became clear that nobody's looking for the 40.8 million modern day slaves. It's a lot of people talking about human trafficking, but almost nobody's actually looking for those trapped in slavery. And there's reasons why. They're not trapped in really nice places. These are places that the good men and women of the world were taught since we were kids to avoid. The dark alleys where things happen, including murder. It's the same marketplace where children are bought and sold and exploited. So for me, all of a sudden, it felt like no one cares enough about these kids to rise up an effort to find and free them. And we didn't know what we were doing either. I didn't. I know you guys talk about purpose a lot, and it just kind of feels like, geez, is this something I should step into? I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But it was disruptive enough that I knew I had to do something. And as fate and God would have it, I started to receive phone calls from some of my partners in the NGO world, the nonprofit world. And they would say, look, Matt, we think there's this child here on this street corner. She's a minor. We're worried about her. I think that she's been trafficked and she's being forced to prostitute herself on the street corner. But we're a ministry, or it's not really what we do. We care about her, but we're looking for somebody that can go and maybe mobilize police to help her. Can you do that? Because they were scared. These people would call me. They're afraid too. Traffickers are not super pleasant all the time. So I talked with my law enforcement partners in Thailand, and they said, look, Matt, this case, these things you're telling us, these are great, but it's secondhand information, and to mobilize law enforcement, we have almost no budget, and we don't trust. There's a lot of corruption we're navigating. These were good cops, but Matt, look, if you go verify personally what's happening, we'll do the case. We'll act. We'll mobilize based on your intelligence, but we need somebody whom we trust to go in there and figure out, are these kids actually being sold, or is that child actually being controlled by a trafficker or not? Because looks can be deceiving sometimes on street corners, what's really going on. And so I took the job and deployed for my very first undercover operation, January 2011.
What was all the training that you had, if you don't mind?
Zero training. I was a youth pastor, which actually I could argue gave me quite a bit of training, but
Right.
I had zero training, except I'm really good with people sometimes. So I can really be friends with almost anybody, but no training. But again, the mission was pretty simple. It was, hey, go have a beer with this trafficker and see if that girl's available. And these were early movements for me in the undercover space. I was terrified. And I was raised Southern Baptist, which means I was a really good kid. Never been in a red light area. Never been in a brothel. None of that stuff, because they beat the snot out of you as a Baptist boy. You got whooped, from the South in particular. They just but so I had really avoided all that stuff my whole life, and I was married. I was faithful to my wife, and so this proposition was an interesting one, and it terrified me. But at the same time, I knew that there were kids involved being exploited, sexually exploited, raped for profit every day that were the same ages as my kids. And I had 2 little girls and a boy at the time. And God just got a hold of us, my wife and I. And, we kind of had to come to terms with the way the world is and the way we want the world to be. And it's the same with the gospel. It's the same with our faith. It's like, hey, look, there's kind of this nice, pleasant, sanitized version of Christianity that you guys have been a part of, but I'm calling you into deep waters where there's danger for the sake of a child, for the sake of the kingdom of God. That's really what was driving me and my wife. And so we had that intimate conversation of, hey, babe, I've never been in these types of environments before. I think I know what goes on there, but I'm not going to go if you don't send me. We don't do this together, because I don't want to go see something that you don't want me to see and then come back and kind of get punished for it, in our marriage, that I was exposed to something. And my wife was awesome. She said, Matt, of course I don't want you to be exposed to those things. But if this were our daughter, we would want God to send someone. We would be begging God to send someone. So my wife was like, you got to go. And so that was my first moment, this baptism into the underworld of drugs and sexuality that is all false pretense. It's a bunch of broken people, desperately poor people, morally corrupt or bankrupt, trying to just feed their own kids. They're willing to exploit each other to survive. And I got to be inserted into that environment for the sake of rescuing children and bringing perpetrators to justice with the 𝓈𝓬 police. So that was back in 2010. That's how this whole thing got started. And it really did not take long for me to recognize, holy cow, I need a team. I can't do this on my own. It's super risky. And so I started to pray, God, I don't even know what I'm doing. Hanging out in brothels, all this stuff. And I need your help. So I stumbled across a few retired special forces operators out of Army in the United States who were living abroad at the time, and they had some undercover experience. The thing they didn't have was law enforcement connection, which is the thing that I had. So I kind of contracted them. They volunteered. I just kind of tried to pay their expenses at the beginning, and we formed a little team called Delta Team. We called it Delta Team, and from there we started rescuing kids with police. First year we rescued around 30 kids, and
wow,
that's awesome.
What felt so foolish at the beginning started to feel like, whoa, this is a doable thing. We can find kids that are being sold, and part of it was, we were white Americans being offered children in Thai brothels. And so it was kind of beyond their thinking that we would be working with police. We look like everybody else. In fact, today, the Exodus Road has 80 global staff and 7 offices now. All of our undercover operatives, nobody knows who they are. We don't publish their faces or their names. And Even law enforcement don't know who they are. So we get to deploy, identify kids, and submit those target packages to law enforcement, and they get to go break down the door. And we just served a role, but we can maintain our anonymity and safety that way too. So today we've rescued 1,500 kids, 4 countries, arrested just over 600 pedophiles and traffickers around the world in about a 10-year effort. You know, and it started off so humbly. We were like, man, we don't know if we can even impact the freedom of one child. But what we've learned is by being a voice for the voiceless and taking those steps of faith into the darkness, God is faithful. And it's exactly what these kids need, is somebody to advocate on their behalf, to disrupt these criminal syndicates that are making billions on children. And so we dedicated our lives to finding and freeing victims of trafficking, and we use volunteer covert investigators, and we also hire and train national investigators who every single day are looking for these kids online. We take down web porn dens. We bulldoze brothels in India on occasion when law will allow it. And we have spent the last decade honing this skill of going undercover and blending and gathering evidence that law enforcement will use to free children. So that's the little 30,000 foot view. I'd love you guys to ask any questions you may have.
That's it.
That's it. No, yeah, we're good. Just a minor little operation, and thanks for highlighting it. No, there's so much fascinating. I mean, this could be a 10-hour podcast because there's so many fascinating pieces about it. And the way I was exposed to you guys was your wife Laura she wrote an ebook that is available on the website, and I think it's still available on the website. I could be wrong, but I had downloaded it years ago now, and was just like completely taken aback by the fact that what you highlighted here, the story of, I think if you sit back and think about what Matt just said, you're in a foreign country doing mission work for children, and then in no time you're literally undercover in some of the darkest, most evil parts of maybe not necessarily parts of the world, but in the environment that is just saturated with things that we can't even imagine what humans do to each other. And you're in it. Like that is like, talk about taking action. That is absolutely unbelievably crazy to me. And I would encourage everybody to read that story because it gives some context to it's, and your wife, what a saint she is, right? To allow you to live your God purpose, but serve her role in that as well, and support and drive the mission and bring awareness. But also, I mean, man, like you're literally being exposed to vices and tempted by vices and just darkness. And it's unbelievable. So, I just think I'm so impressed by the fact that the action required to do that. And it's also sad because it is overwhelming, but you highlight a huge point. It takes one person to start taking action, and then a decade later you've saved thousands of children and put hundreds behind bars. It's an incredible story. There's not a question in that, man. I'm just like sitting here marveling that it is just so humbling and awesome.
Yeah, I'll second that because David introduced me to you guys through that book that Laura wrote, and years ago I read it, and now I'm telling my wife about you guys and how we're supporting you guys, and I introduced her to y'all's podcast, and the other day that she came in from taking our kids to school, and she was listening to your podcast on the way back, and I didn't know she was listening to it. She came in with like tears in her eyes. I was like, "What's going on? Are you okay?" She's like, "I'm listening to the podcast, and I can't believe that this stuff happens. And I was like, I know. And and so I started having this conversation about, hey, once we get out, we're going to support these guys. And I was joking with her, and I was like, yeah, Dave and I are going to go to Colombia and start kicking down doors, and go over to Asia and start doing operations, Delta Force. She's like, what? No, you're not. You guys can just give money. You're not gonna go in and really kick down doors, right? And so just that, like, I would have loved to just been a fly on the wall and just heard that initial conversation between you and Laura of, hey, I'm gonna go. I'm this Christian man. We're overseas doing God's work, doing mission work, but now, hey, Laura, beautiful bride, can I go into brothels where they're exploiting young Asian children, and I'm gonna act like I'm gonna have sex with them? like how did that conversation even start? I can't even imagine.
I mean, it's probably like the best question. I get this a lot from guys, especially if I preach or we're doing something in the faith community. I got guys coming up to me saying, man, I could never do that. I struggled with pornography in my life. I've struggled with sexual desire in my life. And I can't imagine going into a brothel. And I always kind of pull them aside and I put my hand on their shoulder. I'm like, hey guys, look, adultery doesn't happen to you all at once. It's not like you go into a brothel and instantly you can't help yourself. You're cheating on your wife. That is not how it works. This commitment you have to your marriage bed and to your wife, if you ever kind of get to that place where you're ready to cheat on your wife, that was a slow fade. That is something that's taken place in your heart and in your marriage over quite some time. It's not like we're so out of control as men of our sexuality. We, rip our clothes off and, just go at it with a stranger. That's not how it happens. And, I think the thing that I'm grateful for in this line of work is I've had to grow up as a man and as a father and as a husband. And when I say that, I mean, I've had to have the courage not only to brave the brothel or the locked brothel, highly dangerous situations where kids are exploited. I've had to brave my own insecurities, my own failure to lead in my marriage, and I've had to have really hard conversations with my wife about how I tick, about what I would dream our marriage bed to look like, and if she could meet me there. And as I travel and I coach men, I tell them all the time, look, your wife, you're going to share with your wife your deepest sexual fantasies that you want to be pure, but in your marriage bed, and you're not going to get 100% of that. But you might get 50%, and hey, compromise is really what marriage is. And it's not 50-50, it's 100-100. We both have to give all of ourselves to this committed relationship. But for guys and some girls, not all, girls are alike, not all guys are alike, but it's this honest dialogue with the woman that you've committed your life to, or man you've committed your life to say, look, what does our intimacy need to look like? Because I love you and only you. And those conversations, as hard as they can be, they strengthen your bond. They strengthen your marriage. And Laura and I are stronger than we've ever been in our marriage. And it's honestly, a lot of it's because of this work. We've had to have these conversations we otherwise would probably have tiptoed around and tried not to have.
Yeah.
And so many, guys in the faith community, they really get hung up on exposure, what I call exposure in the clandestine environment. Is what I see and what I'm exposed to, does that make me a sinner? Or is it what's happening in my heart? And what does my relationship with God look like? What does my relationship with my wife look like? And as we coach and train Delta team in particular, but our investigators all around the world, we are talking about the environments that we work. And as much as they pretend to be sexual, they're really environments of slavery. And it's pretty obvious. I think if you were to go into a brothel and have maybe no education at all about slavery, I think you would still struggle to walk out of that brothel thinking that those girls are enjoying being there and that they really want to be there. This is their career choice. This is knowing and willing prostitution. Maybe a few girls are doing that, but the majority are desperately poor. They absolutely hate what they're doing and would choose any other career if they could. But society is such that when they have reached their desperate levels of exploitation, of poverty, they are easily exploitable. And to feed their family, to feed themselves, they will believe a lie. They will take the job they don't want. They'll exploit their body. And there's plenty of people within society that are happy to exploit their bodies. And so for me, as a godly man, as a married man, as a father, walking into this environment, it's really not that sexual. Yeah, there's nakedness and there's abuse. I've struggled with post-traumatic stress, tertiary stress, observing rape right in front of me of a child. Those things are heavy things. But I think a lot of Christians in particular won't approach issues like this because of nakedness or because of exposure to uncomfortable things. And, especially in the faith community and as guys, we want to live godly and holy lives. And so we set up all these boundaries and all these rules that are supposed to guide us and keep us safe. But unfortunately, sometimes it actually keeps us from the kingdom of God that we're being called into.
That's so good.
Because of fear, because of the lack of courage we have to have hard conversations with our wives. We would prefer to just stand up a safety cone and stay away from those potholes that we might trip in and fall into sin and just kind of lead this very vanilla kind of Christian life when God's calling us to war. God is calling us to be light in dark places. You can't really be light in a room full of light. You got to be that light in a dark room, not approaching these things with fear, but with courage, not approaching these things with this kind of sense of I'm going to trip into sin, but in faith. And there's fear and trembling. There's 5 loaves, 2 fish moving forward to do the impossible. We have to rely on a God that can anoint us and do miracles with that. But you can't do that in isolation from your wife. Your wife has to come. In fact, your wife should lead the way. Especially in this conversation about holy, powerful sexuality in a marriage. It's the thing the church never talks about, right? But what we have found is most of these temptations that guys struggle with are better met through an honest conversation with their spouse. And we train to some of that to work as an undercover operative for the Exodus Road. Your wife has to go through an interview process as well, or your husband does. We have female investigators as well. This is not just a man's world of covert clandestine service. This is good men and women pushing into the darkness on the sake of a child. And we have, the Exodus Road is not a Christian organization. I've shared this with you guys. And we did that really strategically, and I think I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, youth pastor, and I do crazy things. But the truth is, a lot of Christian ministries in the world have given Christianity a pretty bad name, especially interacting with foreign governments that aren't of a Christian heritage. They may be Buddhist or Hindu or atheist or Islamic, and we have not done an amazing job representing the kingdom of God to groups who may look at it a little bit different. But the thing that I really began to see is, look, I believe that if Jesus were right here and there was a child being exploited, he would want us to go rescue that child. But there's other people we work with and partner with and undercover operatives who would agree that that needs to happen, but they're going to be motivated by a different faith or a different perspective. And I'm a Christian and they know it. And we can circle around this thing that is, in my mind, the kingdom of God, but it's this idea of freedom. And man, guys, I'm just telling you, you start going undercover with some of the most courageous men and women in the world, and you unite around this idea that children shouldn't be sold for sexual slavery on our watch. And everything that drives me comes out, everything that drives them comes out, and all of a sudden we're forming this amazing unit. And it's changed my life, and it's changed my marriage. And I think the thing, when we seek purpose as men and women, this idea of saying, hey, I'm really going to obey. And I describe it this way: we did not set out to fight human trafficking. It's like God put human trafficking in my path, and I just could not walk by it.
Yeah.
I was disrupted to the core, and God started to say, you got to do something. And nobody took my hand and told me what that something was. And it felt foolish, but it was about faith and stepping towards this issue to say, look, whatever I have, my 5 loaves, 2 fish, ridiculously amount of insufficiency, I'm just going to lay it at the altar, and I'm going to show up. And if somebody asks me to do something, I'm going to do my very best to do it, because there's children being bought and sold and raped right now, and no one's looking for them. So I kind of just felt like, look, however laughable or insufficient my efforts might be, it's better than nothing, which is kind of what they're getting now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but again, I think a lot of people get hung up on the sexuality of the thing. And I love that, because it's like, okay, well, then it sounds like we need to work on your sexuality.
Right.
Because sexuality is a great thing. It's a holy thing, and it's not something to be ashamed of or afraid of, but you do have to be courageous in having these conversations with your spouse so that you can have a better marriage bed. Who doesn't want that? Right. We should do a conference about that. We make a fortune, because all these men who want to follow the Lord are afraid to have this conversation. But there's something about what we do that forces that conversation forward. And I've just found it to be healing and refreshing and holy. So anyway, I'm rambling a lot, but
see, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
Those conversations have been precious. They've been precious conversations.
You know, it's interesting, because I didn't anticipate the conversation going this direction. I'm so glad it did, because I think there's, and it kind of leads to my next question, but there's so much, you know, when you start doing God's will and you're open to the, open the floodgates to being available. Pastor Rick Warren, I listen to him a lot. He says, hey, the most dangerous prayer that you can make is use me. Right. And I love that, because God will take you up on it, and you have no idea what the adventure is going to be. But, you know, I think the fact that it's just touching on so many things that are so necessary, huge needs within, not only saving others, but potentially saving your soul, your marriage, your sexuality, all these things that are God ordained, God given, is so impactful and so powerful. And I think the salvation, that we can achieve salvation through support and helping is huge. And it makes me think about, because your guys' mission isn't just about the kicking the doors down and pulling kids out and then it's done. You have such a huge part of your mission about the whole person and the healing and the opportunities. And in some of the time we have left, I'd love for you to touch on some of that aspect as well, the softer side of the Exodus Road and everything you guys are doing for rescue.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Our focus has been finding and freeing, so it's been very much investigations for the last decade. And this year we're launching something called Beyond Rescue. It's our aftercare initiative. A lot of people care about aftercare, and that is the holistic rehabilitation and reintegration of survivors of trafficking. So these girls that we pull out of the brothel, where do they go? You know, the majority of them go to government shelters. I would say 95% of them, maybe 98%. A few of them go into private shelters. And there's a real reason for that. Corrupt governments don't want survivors going to private shelters. They want to control the narrative, because those girls know what law enforcement officer was on the take. They know how they transited into the country and out. And nonprofit organizations have historically been the watchdogs of societies and corrupt governments, and will publish all this data on how awful these countries are. And, you know, we've got these victim testimonies. Well, governments don't want that. So they're de-incentivized to place survivors into private shelters. And so there's a lot of shelters that remain empty. You know, they have empty beds because they struggle at times to get the government to place survivors with them. It does happen, some countries faster than others, but the majority of them go into government shelter and is governed by the Department of Social Welfare in every country we operate. That's very common. But one thing that is a gap we identified is girls that are 18 and over receive almost zero services from the government. If they're minors, they have to care for them. The government mandates that through their laws. But if they're not, then they typically just turn them right back out on the street. You know, they don't give them a place to stay or counseling or trade skill development. All of that is not an opportunity for them. And so for us at the Exodus Road, we're like, well, yeah, she's 18 or 19, but she was trafficked when she was 14. You know, and it just happens we weren't able to find her, or law enforcement didn't intervene until she was an adult. She really can't function well at this level. She needs support. She needs a family. She needs counseling, trade skill development, medical evaluation, all of these things. So we decided to stand up the Beyond Rescue program for girls 18 and boys 18 and over. We're likely going to start with girls this year. It's fully funded already, this pilot program for 2 years. And we're partnering with aftercare shelters in the countries we operate to say, look, you guys are standing up transition homes. We have a home for girls 18 plus. We want to have business development for them, send them back to school if that's necessary, microfinance for them to start their own companies. But it's really about a safe haven for them when they're kicked out of the police station for being a prostitute and fined for doing that. And no consideration's been given to the fact that they were trafficked at 14. Just because they couldn't prove that doesn't mean they're not victims. How do we help them survive and not just go back to prostitution? And I really do talk a lot with people about this. A lot of key stakeholders in this fight against trafficking and donors. There's this pressure, and I feel this all the time. There's this pressure on us as nonprofit leaders to come up with fast food charity. It's like, hey, go solve this very complex justice issue quickly and cheaply. It's only been happening for 1,000 years, so no problem. Just go fix that real quick.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, guys, this fight that we're in, it's a 100-year fight. It will outlive me. We are looking for long-term systemic change. And that has to do with our societies, our cultures. It has to do with the legal system. And we're not fighting prostitution, by the way. Prostitution in lots of countries we operate in is legal. It's not, I don't agree with prostitution. That's not my dream that I have for people that I meet in this brothel. And I would say of the thousands and thousands I've been in over 2,000 brothels in the last decade. I've never met somebody, because I ask girls all the time, do you like your job? And I've never had anybody say yes, except once. And she was brand new. And I saw her a couple months later, and she was destroyed. She hated it. So I think there's a pervasive thought out there that that knowing and willing prostitution is this great this great career path, and sex workers, it's a great career path. And we don't fight that here at the Exodus Road. We fight human trafficking. But I will say this, human trafficking happens within the umbrella of prostitution. It's kind of hidden. These girls are under duress. They're threatened. They're not saying, hey, I've been trafficked. They look like a prostitute. They have to meet a quota of 10 men a night, most of them. And if they don't, there's interest that's going to be placed on their debt bondage. So for us at the Exodus Road, we just have been around the block enough to know a lot of girls we rescue don't qualify for government services. We want to give them every shot of freedom that we can to not go back into prostitution if they don't want that. They may choose to go back. You know, they're not slaves. They're free. They have these choices, but they're going to get their passport back. They're going to get free housing and lodging and health care, medical evaluation. They're going to get job skills training if they choose it. They can go back to school if they choose it. We want to give them their dignity back, and we want to give them choices back. But they're not minors. So there's lots of organizations focusing on minors. We really wanted to focus on those that were trafficked as minors but rescued as adults, and give them every tool that we can give them to get a job, have a resume that's not the red light district they worked at last week. Give them a new resume. So we have an integrated internship program where they go work as interns in their community and get a new job skill. And then when they need to go get a job, it's a skill that's marketable in their own culture. That's really our vision and our dream. So that was a lot. That was a lot of a description, but that's what we're doing, and we're excited about it.
Yeah, that's so cool. I was listening to one of the other episodes of your podcast, and I think it's Sarah. She was talking about her flight from Africa, and you know, she had been on an airplane with a group of women that were going to Saudi Arabia.
Oh yeah, and
they're basically being trafficked for slave labor, basically, right? And you know, this idea and concept that you guys promote, and I think it's on David's t-shirt, you know, just the ordinary, right? Just asking a question, just, hey, something doesn't seem right here. You know, hey, you know, on the airplane, like, can I sit and talk to you and ask you what you're doing, and asking about who you are and what your life is about? And you know, and this idea of them taking their passports being taken away, and they don't have any, they're going to this foreign country where they don't know anybody, they don't know the language, and you know, it's a world that like nobody really is exposed to, that nobody really knows about, but just this idea of just telling people about it, and this idea of just ordinary people stepping up and asking questions, I think is huge, man. And I think it's incredibly powerful. You know, so like from just the ordinary person, right? You know, someone who doesn't know anything about this, like what can we do? What can people do to help, to you know, be empowered to fight this huge problem?
Yeah. Thank you, Stu. It's a great question. I get that question all the time, and I'm going to make this as simple as I know how to make it. There's 3 things I'd like for people to do. Number 1, be an advocate. And that means sharing knowledge. We have a lot of knowledge on our Facebook page. We've made it digestible. You can read that yourself and learn what to look for and how to be a force of change to fight this issue. But you can share that stuff on Facebook, Instagram, all the things. It's so easy to do it. Go to our website, 𝓀𝒾𝒹𝓃.com. There's resources all over the place. Click around. It is empowering. That's our job, is to empower you guys. The second thing I want you to do is see something, say something. It's just like what we used to say after 9/11. We as a community must have the courage to rise up on behalf of those people we walk by every day who actually desperately need us. And we're so busy staring at our phones, and we're so busy, you know, thinking about our day and what we got doing at work, and, you know, what our teenagers are doing, that we absolutely walk right by those people that are being trafficked and that have a need. And there's so many cases, you know, we've sent some cases here to law enforcement in the United States where, you know, people called us and said, hey, look, there's a house across the street from us, and it is super shady. Something's going on. We think it's trafficking. And they gave us that intelligence. We vetted the intelligence. We called local law enforcement on their behalf, connected them with the Counter Human Trafficking Task Force, and we took down, it was actually turned out to be a drug syndicate, but boom. because somebody had the courage to pick up the phone. On our website, we have phone numbers you can call, the National Counter Human Trafficking Hotline. We have numbers you can call as you travel abroad. If you're on a plane and something doesn't feel right, have the courage to strike up a conversation. Now, guys, look, I don't like talking to people on planes either. I like sleeping and just doing work on my laptop. But you have to, if you see something, guys, you're responsible.
Yeah.
We're responsible to each other. Have the courage. You know, in the podcast you mentioned, Stu, you know, Sarah did the exact right thing. She got a hold of a stewardess, and most of airlines have trained stewardesses. They know what to do in these situations, but you got to say something. That's the second thing I'm going to challenge everybody to do. The third thing is easier. It's the easiest thing, and it's the most common thing. Is to donate to the Exodus Road Search and Rescue Program. That is our program where we send out operatives to find and free victims of trafficking all around the world. Any amount helps, $5, $35, $4 million, all of it goes to the field to find and free victims of trafficking. We have gotten our rescue process as lean as we know how to make it. Your dollar goes to rescue people. You can do that through a website. There's a fourth thing. I said I was going to give you three things. There's one more. We don't publicize this as much. Bonus. It's a bonus. Number 4, you can apply to join Delta Team. And that is a very elite group of volunteer investigators. I will train you. My team will train you. And we will deploy you to a country of operation to work in tandem with our national team of investigators, where we can leverage you to find and free victims of trafficking. Totally voluntary. You have to pay your own way. We here at the Exodus Road, we believe in empowering locals and nationals, and we hire them as full-time employees. If you're an American, though, you got to volunteer. Take your vacation time, but we will equip you to be an undercover operative with the Exodus Road, and you can join Delta Team to do that with us. All of that stuff is on our website, but thanks for asking. That's the simplest way that I can encourage you guys listening today to rise up on behalf of the poor and those who are exploited. And everybody shouldn't go into a brothel. You know, it is emotionally draining. All of Delta operatives, Alpha Bravo Charlie teams that we have, they go through counseling, trauma therapy, briefing and debriefing, because it's emotional to be in proximity to this type of poverty and abuse. So everybody's not cut out for Delta Team, but if you're considering that, please apply. Otherwise, there's 3 other really strong options there to really take this fight forward here in our culture, in our society.
Well, one thing that I wanted to kind of hit on, and David and I are obviously kind of doing the easy button right now of giving money, but you know, so I have a sister-in-law that works kind of in this same space. She works at the Dallas Advocacy Center in Dallas, Texas, and you know, she sees this stuff every single day. And I've talked to her before, and you know, she kind of says something similar to what you kind of say is that the easy button is to give money. What's really hard is to have conversations and to tell people and talk about it. And then even the hardest thing obviously is to join like Delta Force and go do it. But even to like talk about it and even bring up like this nasty, ugly, dirty thing that goes on, you know, in this dark world that's just right around the corner from us, is something that's a lot harder to do. And a lot of people just don't want to do it because it's yuck, you know, it's gross. And so I think, you know, for us, this is step one of trying to, you know, talk to people about it. Right. But I think, you know, an ask from David and I to our listeners is to continue to talk about it and to push that out and have those conversations that could be difficult to do.
Yeah, I agree. And I would encourage you guys that are listening that you like, hey, I want to learn how to have this conversation. We have a lot of video resources on our webpage that you can like share. And even for us, when we first started, it took us a while to figure out that what we are actually talking about it's not so much the dirty down rape and kidnapping and like those are all horrendous crimes. But what we really are talking about is handing someone their freedom back. That's the activity. The problem is really dark, and we can, maybe highlight some of those things. 40.8 million modern day slaves, and it can look like slave domestic servitude, like you mentioned, Stu, in Bahrain or Dubai or Saudi Arabia. It could look like forced prostitution. It could look like forced labor in coal mines or palm oil plantations. So it can look like so many things. But really what we're talking about here is what does it take for an ordinary average person to rise up on behalf of the poor? All that nastiness, yes, we need to probably be educated about it. But what we're really talking about is, hey, I'm going to advocate for someone who doesn't have the resources I have, they don't have the freedoms I have, but I can actually play an important role of handing them their freedom and therefore handing them a different future and a different life. Real quick, we did a rescue mission a few years ago, Complicated Transnational Syndicate. And this was from a girl. You can listen to our podcast. We have a podcast on this case. This girl was trafficked from the southern point in Thailand all the way to Bahrain through a false promise of employment. Very common. It was a miracle. It was a miracle that the Exodus Road was able to participate uniquely in her freedom. But as hard as it is to talk about the deception and what she was about to face, she's home back in her village today. She's been married since and has children. Our country director taught her how to cook. And she's living this vibrant life of freedom that she did not have until someone intervened in the exploitation that she was caught up in. And that is hopeful. And that's not a sad story. That's a great story. Awesome. Anytime we can take steps towards the poor, towards those who are suffering, and deliver them, we have participated in the kingdom of God. In my faith journey, that's what I believe. And there's lots of people we can't help. The problem's overwhelming. And sometimes that problem, because of its size, it overwhelms us and it paralyzes us. And we're like, hey, we can't do anything. It's too big of a problem. And I'm here to tell you right now, you and me are the same. I'm an ordinary average guy. Yes, I'm incredibly handsome, but I'll give you that. But apart from that, it's just like, hey, look, I'm a normal dude. Yeah, it's the beard. If I shave it, I look 12. But it just, I think for me, there's this passion of don't find yourself paralyzed. We serve a big God, and he uses ordinary people for his kingdom. God tends to not choose Hollywood types or some really strong hero. He uses the ordinary. His disciples were not the best and the brightest. They were kind of just normal carpenters. And this is what God does. He has this way of inviting us into the impossible, but it's freedom on the other end, spiritual and physical freedom. And we get to offer our 5 loaves and 2 fish, and we slowly are a part of this movement that gives people their lives back. And that is a legacy and a purpose worth fighting for. So as we learn, as you listeners learn to be advocates, to rise up on behalf of the poor, to learn how to speak about this, human trafficking is such a dinner conversation.
Yeah.
But it's got to shift from, hey, did you know 40.8 million people are being raped every night, to we actually can impact the freedom of people trapped in slavery. Come do that with me.
Amen.
That's the conversation. It's a different conversation. I don't invite people into the doom and gloom of the brothel. I invite people to come and hand a different future to people who have no other hope. That's what we do.
That's awesome.
So yes, it's a hard topic. I'm just so thankful for you gentlemen to brave these waters with me. It's an honor. And we are in the business of mobilizing people to fight this all around the world. And this is what it takes, these types of conversations.
Yeah, I love that. One thing as a parting thought, you talked about the overwhelming nature of the problem and the numbers. And one thing that encourages me, and I don't know if I got this from something I heard from you guys or something I read, but to the person that you save, it's their world, right? It's an overwhelming problem.
Yeah.
The 40 million is huge, but when you look in the eyes of the single person that you just pulled out of that, I mean, you just saved their entire world. That person is now free. And I think when you look at it, each one of us do something, right? Each one of us can do something, and it's one at a time. But if you do feel overwhelmed, it's just that I think you look back at those individuals whose lives are completely changed, and it's awesome, man. It's our pleasure to jump into this pool. I think we're still in the kiddie side as compared to where you're swimming, but and I know there are people on this podcast, because a lot of our listeners are military members, and they're just snake eating warheads on foreheads type kind of guys and gals. And so I would love it if they reached out to you and said, hey, I'm interested in using my skills. I know, people joke about, crippies and the cyber side and the intel side, but I'm already trying to think through and have connected with you guys with some guys that are out of the military and that are cyber ninjas, and they use these platforms of sales. So I would encourage everybody out there. It doesn't matter what your background is. You can absolutely contribute. You can help crush it. I mean, it's so encouraging to know that ordinary dudes, albeit very handsome like ourselves, can do something about this, right? And it's awesome.
I mean, you kind of got like crooked nose dude, and you got
look, man. If you were to go kick in a door, they'd have to 𝓈𝓊𝓇𝒹 you out because you broke your toe or something, dude. You'd be like laying on the ground crying, like, oh, who brought this guy?
Brought this weak little dude. That's good stuff.
Awesome, man. It's awesome.
Matt, man, we could probably talk for a couple more hours. I'm fired up. I know for a fact that our listeners are going to get a lot out of this and be encouraged, to step up. And you've motivated us for sure, and we want to be as much of an advocate as we possibly can, humanly possible. We're going to spread this word. For the folks that are listening, reach out to Matt. They are looking for advocates. They are looking for people to join Delta Force. They're looking for people to come to Colorado Springs and work in their offices. Let's go solve this 100-year problem, 1,000-year problem.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man.
So Matt, best way to get a hold of you is just kind of through the website, or what's the best way?
Yeah, info@𝒽𝒶𝓃𝒹.com. My team filters to the right department. If it's Delta, it'll make its way to my global ops department. But info@𝒽𝒶𝓃𝒹.com, and check out our website. It's all kind of there for you.
Yeah, and we talked about your podcast a lot. I'm gonna plug it. It's awesome. I am hooked on it. It's called Until All Are Free. And then also read the ebook that Laura wrote. It's also amazing. Between those two, you're gonna be hooked, I promise.
Fired up.
Yeah, man. Dave, you got anything else?
No, Matt, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate just your heart for helping, your heart for service, just your heart to again to spend some time with some knuckleheads like us. And I'm going to beat Stu to it this time. But if you're looking for a best friend, I'm always in the market, because mine is kind of you met him, but really just very grateful for you and your team and everything you guys do, and just completely humbled and honored that you would join us, and I'm really looking forward to people reacting and giving and doing what they can to get after this problem. So love it. Keep up the awesome work, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Stu.
All right, well, go subscribe to this podcast, listen to it, share it, give us lots of 5-star reviews, and most importantly, go fill your storehouse.
Make it a great day, friends.
See ya.
See ya.